A Demon in Chains, Milady's Art of Seduction, The Three Musketeers, Audiobook, chapters 48 to 51. Welcome back to the Emotive Archive. We left our four heroes in possession of a terrible secret, having decided to wage their own secret war against the Cardinal's deadliest agent. But while they are occupied by the siege of La Rochelle, their enemy is already on the move. Milady de Winter has sailed for England on her mission to assassinate the Duke of Buckingham. In these next chapters, we will follow her into the lion's den, a hostile country where she believes her beauty and the Cardinal's pardon will protect her. But an old enemy awaits, one who knows her dark past.
Chapter 48 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A family affair. Athos had invented the phrase, family affair. A family affair was not subject to the investigation of the cardinal. A family affair concerned nobody. People might employ themselves in a family affair before all the world. Therefore, Athos had invented the phrase, family affair. Aramis had discovered the idea, the lackeys. Porthos had discovered the means, the diamond. D'Artagnan alone had discovered nothing. He, ordinarily the most inventive of the four, but it must also be said that the very name of Milady paralyzed him. No, we were mistaken. He had discovered a purchaser for his diamond. The breakfast at Monsieur de Tréville's was as gay and cheerful as possible. D'Artagnan already wore his uniform, for being nearly of the same size as Aramis, and as Aramis was so liberally paid by the publisher who purchased his poem as to allow him to buy everything double, he sold his friend a complete outfit. D'Artagnan would have been at the height of his wishes if he had not constantly seen Milady like a dark cloud hovering in the horizon. After breakfast, it was agreed that they should meet again in the evening at Athos's lodging, and there finish their plans. D'Artagnan passed the day in exhibiting his Musketeer's uniform in every street of the camp. In the evening, at the appointed hour, the four friends met. There only remained three things to decide: what they should write to Milady's brother, what they should write to the clever person at Tours, and which should be the lackeys to carry the letters. Everyone offered his own. Athos talked of the discretion of Grimaud, who never spoke a word but when his master unlocked his mouth. Porthos boasted of the strength of Mousqueton, who was big enough to thrash four men of ordinary size. Aramis, confiding in the address of Bazin, made a pompous eulogium on his candidate. Finally, D'Artagnan had entire faith in the bravery of Planchet, and reminded them of the manner in which he had conducted himself in the ticklish affair of Boulogne. These four virtues disputed the prize for a length of time, and gave birth to magnificent speeches which we do not repeat here, for fear they should be deemed too long. "Unfortunately," said Athos, "he whom we send must possess in himself alone the four qualities united." "But where is such a lackey to be found?" "Not to be found!" cried Athos. "I know it well. So take Grimaud."
"Take Mousqueton."
"Take Bazin." "Take Planchet. Planchet is brave and shrewd. They are two qualities out of the four." "Gentlemen," said Aramis, "the principal question is not to know which of our four lackeys is the most discreet, the most strong, the most clever, or the most brave. The principal thing is to know which loves money the best." "What Aramis says is very sensible," replied Athos. "We must speculate upon the faults of people, and not upon their virtues. Monsieur Abbé, you are a great moralist." "Doubtless," said Aramis, "for we not only require to be well served in order to succeed, but moreover not to fail. For in the case of failure, heads are in question, not for our lackeys." "Speak lower, Aramis," said Athos. "That's wise, not for the lackeys," resumed Aramis, but for the master, for the masters, we may say. Are our lackeys sufficiently devoted to us to risk their lives for us? No.
My faith, said D'Artagnan, I would almost answer for Planchet.
Well, my dear friend, add to his natural devotedness a good sum of money, and then, instead of answering for him once, answer for him twice.
Why, good God, you will be deceived just the same, said Athos, who was an optimist when things were concerned, and a pessimist when men were in question. They will promise everything for the sake of the money, and on the road fear will prevent them from acting. Once taken, they will be pressed. When pressed, they will confess everything. What the devil? We are not children. To reach England, Athos lowered his voice, all France, covered with spies and creatures of the Cardinal, must be crossed. A passport for embarkation must be obtained, and the party must be acquainted with English in order to ask the way to London. Really, I think the thing very difficult.
Not at all, cried D'Artagnan, who was anxious the matter should be accomplished.
On the contrary, I think it very easy. It would be no doubt, parbleu, if we write to Lord de Winter about affairs of vast importance, of the horrors of the Cardinal.
Speak lower, said Athos.
Of intrigues and secrets of state, continued D'Artagnan, complying with the recommendation. There can be no doubt we would all be broken on the wheel, but for God's sake, do not forget, as you yourself said, Athos, that we only write to him concerning a family affair, that we only write to him to entreat that as soon as Milady arrives in London, he will put it out of her power to injure us. I will write to him then, nearly in these terms.
Let us see, said Athos, assuming in advance a critical look.
Monsieur and dear friend—
Ah, yes, dear friend to an Englishman, interrupted Athos. Well commenced. Bravo, D'Artagnan. Only with that word you will be quartered instead of being broken on the wheel.
Well, perhaps I will say then, Monsieur, quite short.
You may even say, my lord, replied Athos, who stickled for propriety.
My lord, do you remember the little goat pasture of the Luxembourg?
Good, the Luxembourg. One might believe this is an allusion to the Queen Mother. That's ingenious, said Athos.
Well, then, we will put simply, my lord, do you remember a certain little enclosure where your life was spared?
My dear D'Artagnan, you will never make anything but a very bad secretary. Where your life was spared? For shame! That's unworthy. A man of spirit is not to be reminded of such services. A benefit reproached is an offense committed.
The devil, said D'Artagnan, you are insupportable. If the letter must be written under your censure, my faith, I renounce the task.
And you will do right. Handle the musket and the sword, my dear fellow. You will come off splendidly at those two exercises. But pass the pen over to Monsieur Abbé. That's his province.
Aye, aye,
said Porthos.
Pass the pen to Aramis, who writes theses in Latin.
Well, so be it, said D'Artagnan. Draw up this note for us, Aramis, but by our Holy Father the Pope, cut it short, for I shall prune you in my turn, I warn you.
I ask no better, said Aramis with that ingenious air of confidence which every poet has in himself. But let me be properly acquainted with the subject. I have heard here and there that this sister-in-law was a hussy. I have obtained proof of it by listening to her conversation with the cardinal. Lower, sacre bleu, said Athos. But, continued Aramis, the details escape me.
And me also,
said Porthos. D'Artagnan and Athos looked at each other for some time in silence. At length, Athos, after serious reflection, and becoming more pale than usual, made a sign of assent to D'Artagnan, who by it understood he was at liberty to speak.
Well, this is what you have to say, said D'Artagnan. My lord, your sister-in-law is an infamous woman, who wished to have you killed, that she might inherit your wealth. But she could not marry your brother, being already married in France, and having been—" D'Artagnan stopped, as if seeking for the word, and looked at Athos. "Repudiated by her husband," said Athos. "Because she had been branded," continued D'Artagnan.
Bah!
Cried Porthos.
Impossible! What do you say? That she wanted to have her brother-in-law killed?
"Yes."
She was married?
asked Aramis. "Yes."
And her husband found out that she had a fleur-de-lis on her shoulder?
cried Porthos. "Yes."
These three yeses had been pronounced by Athos, each with a sadder intonation.
And who has seen this fleur-de-lis?
inquired Aramis.
"D'Artagnan and I, or rather, to observe the chronological order, I and D'Artagnan,"
replied Athos.
And does the husband of this frightful creature still live?
said Aramis.
"He still lives."
Are you quite sure of it?
"I am he."
There was a moment of cold silence, during which everyone was affected according to his nature.
"This time," said Athos, first breaking the silence, "D'Artagnan has given us an excellent program, and the letter must be written at once."
The devil! You are right, Athos,
said Aramis.
and it is a rather difficult matter. The Chancellor himself would be puzzled how to write such a letter, and yet the Chancellor draws up an official report very readily. Never mind. Be silent. I will write.
Aramis accordingly took the quill, reflected for a few moments, wrote 8 or 10 lines in a charming little female hand, and then, with a voice soft and slow, as if each word had been scrupulously weighed, he read the following.
My lord, the person who writes these few lines had the honor of crossing swords with you in the little enclosure of the Rue d'Enfer. As you have several times since declared yourself the friend of that person, he thinks it is his duty to respond to that friendship by sending you important information. Twice, you have nearly been the victim of a near relative, whom you believe to be your heir, because you are ignorant that before she contracted a marriage in England, she was already married in France. But the third time, which is the present, you may succumb. Your relative left La Rochelle for England during the night. Watch her arrival, for she has great and terrible projects. If you require to know positively what she is capable of, read her past history on her left shoulder.
"Well, now that will do wonderfully well," said Athos. "My dear Aramis, you have the pen of a Secretary of State. Lord de Winter will now be upon his guard if the letter should reach him, and even if it should fall into the hands of the cardinal, we shall not be compromised. But as the lackey who goes may make us believe he has been to London and may stop at Châtellerault, let us give him only half the sum promised him, with the letter, with an agreement that he shall have the other half in exchange for the reply. Have you the diamond?" continued Athos.
I have what is still better. I have the price, said D'Artagnan. He threw the bag upon the table. At the sound of the gold, Aramis raised his eyes, and Porthos started. As to Athos, he remained unmoved.
"How much is in that little bag?"
7,000 livres in louis of 12 francs.
7,000 livres?
cried Porthos.
That poor little diamond was worth 7,000 livres?
"It appears so," said Athos. "Since here they are, I don't suppose that our friend D'Artagnan has added any of his own to the amount."
"But, gentlemen, in all this," said D'Artagnan, "we do not think of the queen. Let us take some heed of the welfare of her dear Buckingham. That is the least we owe her."
"That's true," said Athos, "but that concerns Aramis."
"Well," replied the latter, blushing,
what must I say?"
"Oh, that's simple enough," replied Athos. "Write a second letter for that clever personage who lives at Tours." Aramis resumed his pen, reflected a little, and wrote the following lines, which he immediately submitted to the approbation of his friends.
My dear cousin.
"Ah, said Athos. "This clever person is your relative, then?"
Cousin German.
"Go on to your cousin, then."
Aramis continued.
My dear cousin, His Eminence, the Cardinal, whom God preserve for the happiness of France and the confusion of the enemies of the kingdom, is on the point of putting an end to the hectic rebellion of La Rochelle. It is probable that the succor of the English fleet will never even arrive in sight of the place. I will even venture to say that I am certain Monsieur de Buckingham will be prevented from setting out by some great event. His Eminence is the most illustrious politician of times past, of times present, and probably of times to come. He would extinguish the sun if the sun incommoded him. Give these happy tidings to your sister, my dear cousin. I have dreamed that the unlucky Englishman was dead. I cannot recollect whether it was by steel or by poison. Only of this I am sure. I have dreamed he was dead, and you know my dreams never deceive me. Be assured, then, of seeing me soon return."
"Capital!" cried Athos. "You are the king of poets, my dear Aramis. You speak like the Apocalypse, and you are as true as the Gospel. There is nothing now to do but to put the address to this letter."
"That is easily done,"
said Aramis. He folded the letter fancifully and took up his pen and wrote,
"To Mademoiselle Michon, seamstress, Tours."
The three friends looked at one another and laughed. They were caught.
"Now," said Aramis, "you will please to understand, gentlemen, that Bazin alone can carry this letter to Tours. My cousin knows nobody but Bazin, and places confidence in nobody but him. Any other person would fail. Besides, Bazin is ambitious and learned. Bazin has read history, gentlemen. He knows that Sixtus V became pope after having kept pigs. Well, as he means to enter the church at the same time as myself, he does not despair of becoming pope in his turn, or at least a cardinal. You can understand that a man who has such views will never allow himself to be taken, or if taken, will undergo martyrdom rather than speak."
"Very well," said D'Artagnan. "I consent to Bazin with all my heart. But grant me Planchet. Milady had him one day turned out of doors, with sundry blows of a good stick to accelerate his motions. Now, Planchet has an excellent memory, and I will be bound that sooner than relinquish any possible means of vengeance, he will allow himself to be beaten to death. If your arrangements at Tours are your arrangements, Aramis, those of London are mine. I request, then, that Planchet may be chosen, more particularly as he has already been to London with me and knows how to speak correctly. London, sir, if you please, and my master, Lord D'Artagnan. With that you may be satisfied. He can make his way, both going and returning."
"In that case," said Athos, "Planchet must receive 700 livres for going, and 700 livres for coming back. And Bazin, 300 livres for going, and 300 livres for returning. That will reduce the sum to 5,000 livres. We will each take 1,000 livres to be employed as seems good, and we will leave a fund of 1,000 livres under the guardianship of Monsieur Abbé here, for extraordinary occasions or common wants. Will that do?"
"My dear Athos," said Aramis, "you speak like Nestor, who was, as everyone knows, the wisest among the Greeks."
"Well, then," said Athos, "it is agreed. Planchet and Bazin shall go. Everything considered, I am not sorry to retain Grimaud. He is accustomed to my ways, and I am particular. Yesterday's affair must have shaken him a little. His voyage would upset him quite."
Planchet was sent for, and instructions were given him. The matter had been named to him by D'Artagnan, who in the first place pointed out the money to him, then the glory, and then the danger. "I will carry the letter in the lining of my coat," said Planchet, "and if I am taken, I will swallow it."
"Well, but then you will not be able to fulfill your commission," said D'Artagnan. "You will give me a copy this evening, which I shall know by heart tomorrow." D'Artagnan looked at his friends as if to say, "Well, what did I tell you?" "Now," continued he, addressing Planchet, "you have 8 days to get an interview with Lord de Winter. You have 8 days to return, in all 16 days. If on the 16th day after your departure, at 8 o'clock in the evening, you are not here, no money, even if it be but 5 minutes past 8. "Then, monsieur," said Planchet, "you must buy me a watch." "Take this," said Athos, with his usual careless generosity, giving him his own. "And be a good lad. Remember, if you talk, if you babble, if you get drunk, you risk your master's head, who has so much confidence in your fidelity, and who answers for you. But remember also that if by your fault any evil happens to D'Artagnan, I will find you, wherever you may be, for the purpose of ripping up your belly." "Oh, monsieur," said Planchet, humiliated by the suspicion, and moreover terrified at the calm air of the Musketeer.
"And I," said Porthos, rolling his large eyes, "remember, I will skin you alive."
"Ah, monsieur!"
"And I," said Aramis with his soft, melodious voice, "remember that I will roast you at a slow fire like a savage."
"Ah, monsieur!" Planchet began to weep. We will not venture to say whether it was from terror created by the threats, or from tenderness at seeing 4 friends so closely united. D'Artagnan took his hand. "See, Planchet," said he, "these gentlemen only say this out of affection for me, but at the bottom they all like you." "Monsieur," said Planchet, "I will succeed, or I will consent to be cut in quarters, and if they do cut me in quarters, be assured that not a morsel of me will speak." It was decided that Planchet should set out the next day at 8 o'clock in the morning, in order, as he had said, that he might during the night learn the letter by heart. He gained just 12 hours by this engagement. He was to be back on the 16th day by 8 o'clock in the evening. In the morning, as he was mounting his horse, D'Artagnan, who felt at the bottom of his heart a partiality for the duke, took Planchet aside. "Listen," said he to him. "When you have given the letter to Lord de Winter and he has read it, you will further say to him, 'Watch over his grace Lord Buckingham, for they wish to assassinate him.' But this, Planchet, is so serious and important that I have not informed my friends that I would entrust the secret to you, and for a captain's commission I would not write it." "Be satisfied, monsieur," said Planchet. "You shall see if confidence can be placed in me." Mounted on an excellent horse, which he was to leave at the end of 20 leagues in order to take the post, Planchet set off at a gallop, his spirits a little depressed by the triple promise made him by the Musketeers, but otherwise as light-hearted as possible. Bazin set out the next day for Tours, and was allowed 8 days for performing his commission. The 4 friends, during the period of these 2 absences, had, as may well be supposed, the eye on the watch, the nose to the wind, and the ear on the hark. Their days were passed in endeavoring to catch all that was said, in observing the proceeding of the cardinal, and in looking out for all the couriers who arrived. More than once, an involuntary trembling seized them when called upon for some unexpected service. They had besides to look constantly to their own proper safety. Milady was a phantom, which, when it had once appeared to people, did not allow them to sleep very quietly. On the morning of the 8th day, Bazin, fresh as ever and smiling according to custom, entered the cabaret of the Parpaillot as the 4 friends were sitting down to breakfast, saying, as had been agreed upon, "Monsieur Aramis, the answer from your cousin." The 4 friends exchanged a joyful glance. Half of the work was done. It is true, however, that it was the shorter and easier part. Aramis, blushing in spite of himself, took the letter, which was in a large, coarse hand, and not particular for its orthography.
"Good God!" cried he, laughing. "I was quite despair of my poor Michon. She will never write like Monsieur de Voiture."
"What do you mean by poor Michon?" said the Swiss, who was chatting with the 4 friends when the letter came.
"Ah, pardieu, less than nothing," said Aramis. "A charming little seamstress whom I love dearly, and whose hand I requested a few lines as a sort of keepsake." "The devil!" said the Swiss. "And if she is great a lady as her writing is large, you are a lucky fellow, comrade." Aramis read the letter and passed it to Athos.
"See what she writes to me, Athos," said he. Athos cast a glance over the epistle, and to disperse all the suspicions that might have been created, read aloud, "My cousin, my sister and I are skillful in interpreting dreams, and even entertain great fear of them. But of yours it may be said, I hope, every dream is an illusion. Adieu, take care of yourself, and act so that we may from time to time hear you spoken of. Marie Michon."
"And what dream does she mean?"
asked the dragoon, who had approached during the reading.
"Yes, what's the dream?"
said the Swiss.
"Well, pardieu," said Aramis, "it was only this. I had a dream, and I related it to her."
"Yes,
said the Swiss. "It's simple enough to tell a dream, but I never dream."
"You are very fortunate," said Athos, rising. "I wish I could say as much."
"Never,"
replied the Swiss, enchanted that a man like Athos could envy him anything.
"Never."
D'Artagnan, seeing Athos rise, did likewise, took his arm, and went out. Porthos and Aramis remained behind to encounter the jokes of the dragoon and the Swiss. As to Bazin, he went and lay down on a truss of straw, and as he had more imagination than the Swiss, he dreamed that Aramis, having become pope, adorned his head with a cardinal's hat. But as we have said, Bazin had not, by his fortunate return, removed more than a part of the uneasiness which weighed upon the four friends. The days of expectation are long, and D'Artagnan in particular would have wagered that the days were 44 hours. He forgot the necessary slowness of navigation. He exaggerated to himself the power of Milady. He credited this woman, who appeared to him the equal of a demon, with agents as supernatural as herself. At least the noise, he imagined himself about to be arrested, and that Planchet was being brought back to be confronted with himself and his friends. Still further, his confidence in the worthy Picard, at one time so great, diminished day by day. This anxiety became so great that it even extended to Aramis and Porthos. Athos alone remained unmoved, as if no danger hovered over him, and as if he breathed his customary atmosphere. On the 16th day in particular, these signs were so strong in D'Artagnan and his two friends that they could not remain quiet in one place, and wandered about like ghosts on the road by which Planchet was expected. "Really," said Athos to them, "you are not men but children to let a woman terrify you so. And what does it amount to after all? To be imprisoned? Well, but we should be taken out of prison. Madame Bonacieux was released. To be decapitated? Why, every day in the trenches we go cheerfully to expose ourselves to worse than that. For a bullet may break a leg, and I am convinced a surgeon would give us more pain in cutting off a thigh than an executioner in cutting off a head. Wait quietly, then. In 2 hours, in 4, in 6 hours at latest, Planchet will be here. He promised to be here, and I have very great faith in Planchet, who appears to me to be a very good lad." "But if he does not come?" said D'Artagnan. "Well, if he does not come, it will be because he has been delayed, that's all. He may have fallen from his horse. He may have cut a caper from the deck. He may have traveled so fast against the wind as to have brought on a violent catarrh. Gentlemen, let us reckon upon accidents. Life is a chaplet of little mysteries, which the philosopher counts with a smile. Be philosophers, as I am, gentlemen. Sit down at the table, and let us drink. Nothing makes the future look so bright as surveying it through the glass of a Chambertin." "That's all very well," replied D'Artagnan, "but I am tired of fearing, when I open a fresh bottle, that the wine may come from the cellar of Milady." "You are very fastidious," said Athos. "Such a beautiful woman."
"A woman of mark,"
said Porthos with his loud laugh. Athos started, passed his hand over his brow to remove the drops of perspiration that burst forth, and rose in his turn with a nervous movement he could not repress. The day, however, passed away, and the evening came on slowly, but finally it came. The bars were filled with drinkers. Athos, who had pocketed his share of the diamond, seldom quit the Parpaillot. He had found in Monsieur de Busigny, who, by the by, had given them a magnificent dinner, a partner worthy of his company. They were playing together as usual when 7 o'clock sounded. The patrol was heard passing to double the posts. At 7:30 the retreat was sounded. "We are lost," said D'Artagnan in the ear of Athos. "You mean to say we have lost?" said Athos, quietly drawing 4 pistoles from his pocket and throwing them upon the table. "Come, gentlemen," said he, "they are beating the tattoo. Let us to bed." And Athos went out of the Parpaillot, followed by D'Artagnan. Aramis came behind, giving his arm to Porthos. Aramis mumbled verses to himself, and Porthos from time to time pulled a hair or two from his mustache in sign of despair. But all at once a shadow appeared in the darkness, the outline of which was familiar to D'Artagnan, and a well-known voice said, "Monsieur, I have brought your cloak. It is chilly this evening." "Planchet!" cried D'Artagnan, beside himself with joy. "Planchet!" repeated Porthos and Aramis. "Well, yes, Planchet to be sure," said Athos. "What is there so astonishing in that? He promised to be back by 8 o'clock, and 8 is striking. Bravo, Planchet! You are a lad of your word, and if ever you leave your master, I will promise you a place in my service." "Oh, no, never!" said Planchet. "I will never leave Monsieur D'Artagnan." At the same time, D'Artagnan felt that Planchet slipped a note into his hand. D'Artagnan felt a strong inclination to embrace Planchet as he had embraced him on his departure, but he feared lest this mark of affection bestowed upon his lackey in the open street might appear extraordinary to passers-by, and he restrained himself. "I have the note," said he to Athos and to his friends. "That's well," said Athos. "Let us go home and read it." The note burned the hand of D'Artagnan. He wished to hasten their steps, but Athos took his arm and passed it under his own, and the young man was forced to regulate his pace by that of his friend. At length they reached the tent, lit a lamp, and while Planchet stood at the entrance that the 4 friends might not be surprised, D'Artagnan, with a trembling hand, broke the seal and opened the so anxiously expected letter. It contained half a line, in a hand perfectly British, and with a conciseness as perfectly Spartan. "Thank you. Be easy." D'Artagnan translated this for the others. Athos took the letter from the hands of D'Artagnan, approached the lamp, set fire to the paper, and did not let go till it was reduced to a cinder. Then calling Planchet, he said, "Now, my lad, you may claim your 700 livres, but you did not run much risk with such a note as that." "I am not to blame for having tried every means to compress it," said Planchet. "Well," cried D'Artagnan, "tell us all about it." "Dame, that's a long job, monsieur." "You are right, Planchet," said Athos. "Besides, the tattoo has been sounded, and we should be observed if we kept a light burning much longer than the others." "So be it," said D'Artagnan. "Go to bed, Planchet, and sleep soundly." "My faith, monsieur, that will be the first time I have done so for 16 days." "And me too," said D'Artagnan. "And me too," said Porthos. "And me too," said Aramis. "Well, if you will have the truth, and me too," said Athos. End of chapter 48. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 49 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers, by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Fatality. Meantime, Milady, drunk with passion, roaring on the deck like a lioness that has been embarked, had been tempted to throw herself into the sea that she might regain the coast, for she could not get rid of the thought that she had been insulted by D'Artagnan, threatened by Athos, and that she had quit France without being revenged on them. This idea soon became so insupportable to her that at the risk of whatever terrible consequences might result to herself from it, she implored the captain to put her on shore. But the captain, eager to escape from his false position, placed between French and English cruisers, like the bat between the mice and the birds, was in great haste to regain England, and positively refused to obey what he took for a woman's caprice, promising his passenger, who had been particularly recommended to him by the cardinal, to land her, if the sea and the French permitted him, at one of the ports of Brittany, either at Lorient or Brest. But the wind was contrary, the sea bad. They tacked and kept offshore. 9 days after leaving the Charente, pale with fatigue and vexation, Milady saw only the blue coasts of Finistère appear. She calculated that to cross this corner of France and return to the Cardinal it would take her at least 3 days. Add another day for landing, and that would make 4. Add these 4 to the 9 others, that would be 13 days lost. 13 days, during which so many important events might pass in London. She reflected likewise that the cardinal would be furious at her return, and consequently would be more disposed to listen to the complaints brought against her than to the accusations she brought against others. She allowed the vessel to pass Lorient and Brest without repeating her request to the captain, who on his part took care not to remind her of it. Milady therefore continued her voyage, and on the very day that Planchet embarked at Portsmouth for France, the messenger of his Eminence entered the port in triumph. All the city was agitated by an extraordinary movement. 4 large vessels, recently built, had just been launched. At the end of the jetty, his clothes richly laced with gold, glittering, as was customary with him, with diamonds and precious stones, his hat ornamented with a white feather which drooped upon his shoulder, Buckingham was seen surrounded by a staff almost as brilliant as himself. It was one of those rare and beautiful days in winter when England remembers that there is a sun. The star of day, pale but nevertheless still splendid, was setting in the horizon, glorifying at once the heavens and the sea with bands of fire, and casting upon the towers and the old houses of the city a last ray of gold, which made the windows sparkle like the reflection of a conflagration. Breathing that sea breeze, so much more invigorating and balsamic as the land is approached, contemplating all the power of those preparations she was commissioned to destroy, all the power of that army which she was to combat alone. She, a woman with a few bags of gold. Milady compared herself mentally to Judith, the terrible Jewess, when she penetrated the camp of the Assyrians and beheld the enormous mass of chariots, horses, men, and arms, which a gesture of her hand was to dissipate like a cloud of smoke. They entered the roadstead, but as they drew near in order to cast anchor, a little cutter, looking like a coast guard formidably armed, approached the merchant vessel and dropped into the sea a boat which directed its course to the latter. This boat contained an officer, a mate, and 8 rowers. The officer alone went on board, where he was received with all the deference inspired by the uniform. The officer conversed a few instants with the captain, gave him several papers of which he was the bearer to read, and upon the order of the merchant captain the whole crew of the vessel, both passengers and sailors, were called upon deck. When this species of summons was made, the officer inquired aloud the point of the brig's departure, its route, its landings, and to all these questions the captain replied without difficulty and without hesitation. Then the officer began to pass in review all the people, one after the other, and stopping when he came to Milady, surveyed her very closely, but without addressing a single word to her. He then returned to the captain, said a few words to him, and as if from that moment the vessel was under his command, he ordered a maneuver which the crew executed immediately. Then the vessel resumed its course, still escorted by the little cutter, which sailed side by side with it, menacing it with the mouths of its 6 cannon. The boat followed in the wake of the ship, a speck near the enormous mass. During the examination of Milady by the officer, as may well be imagined, Milady on her part was not less scrutinizing in her glances. But however great was the power of this woman, with eyes of flame and reading the hearts of those whose secrets she wished to divine, she met this time with a countenance of such impassivity that no discovery followed her investigation. The officer who had stopped in front of her and studied her with so much care might have been 25 or 26 years of age. He was of pale complexion with clear blue eyes, rather deeply set. His mouth, fine and well cut, remained motionless in its correct lines. His chin, strongly marked, denoted the strength of will which in the ordinary Britannic type denotes mostly nothing but obstinacy. A brow a little receding, as is proper for poets, enthusiasts, and soldiers, was scarcely shaded by short, thin hair, which, like the beard which covered the lower part of his face, was of a beautiful deep chestnut color. When they entered the port, it was already night. The fog increased the darkness, and formed round the stern lights and lanterns of the jetty a circle like that which surrounds the moon when the weather threatens to become rainy. The air they breathed was heavy, damp, and cold. Milady, that woman so courageous and firm, shivered in spite of herself. The officer desired to have Milady's packages pointed out to him, and ordered them to be placed in the boat. When this operation was complete, he invited her to descend by offering her his hand. Milady looked at this man and hesitated. "Who are you, sir?" asked she. "Who has the kindness to trouble yourself so particularly on my account?" "You may perceive, madame, by my uniform, that I am an officer in the English navy," replied the young man. "But is it the custom for the officers in the English navy to place themselves at the service of their female compatriots when they land in a port of Great Britain, and carry their gallantry so far as to conduct them ashore?" "Yes, madame, it is the custom, not from gallantry but prudence, that in time of war foreigners should be conducted to particular hotels, in order that they may remain under the eye of the government until full information can be obtained about them." These words were pronounced with the most exact politeness and the most perfect calmness. Nevertheless, they had not the power of convincing Milady. "But I am not a foreigner, sir," said she, with an accent as pure as ever was heard between Portsmouth and Manchester. "My name is Lady Clarick, and this measure—" "This measure is general, madame, and you will seek in vain to evade it." "I will follow you then, sir." Accepting the hand of the officer, she began the descent of the ladder, at the foot of which the boat waited. The officer followed her. A large cloak was spread at the stern. The officer requested her to sit down upon this cloak and place himself beside her. "Row," said he to the sailors. The 8 oars fell at once into the sea, making but a single sound, giving but a single stroke, and the boat seemed to fly over the surface of the water. In 5 minutes they gained the land. The officer leaped to the pier and offered his hand to Milady. A carriage was in waiting. "Is this carriage for us?" asked Milady. "Yes, madame," replied the officer. "The hotel, then, is far away?" "At the other end of the town." "Very well," said Milady, and she resolutely entered the carriage. The officer saw that the baggage was fastened carefully behind the carriage, and this operation ended, he took his place beside Milady and shut the door. Immediately, without any order being given or his place of destination indicated, the coachman set off at a rapid pace and plunged into the streets of the city. So strange a reception naturally gave Milady ample matter for reflection. So, seeing that the young officer did not seem at all disposed for conversation, she reclined in her corner of the carriage, and one after the other passed in review all the surmises which presented themselves to her mind. At the end of a quarter of an hour, however, surprised at the length of the journey, she leaned forward toward the door to see whither she was being conducted. Houses were no longer to be seen. Trees appeared in the darkness like great black phantoms chasing one another. Milady shuddered. "But we are no longer in the city, sir," said she. The young officer preserved silence. "I beg you to understand, sir, I will go no farther unless you tell me whither you are taking me." This threat brought no reply. "Oh, this is too much!" cried Milady. "Help! Help!" No voice replied to hers. The carriage continued to roll on with rapidity. The officer seemed a statue. Milady looked at the officer with one of those terrible expressions peculiar to her countenance, and which so rarely failed of their effect. Anger made her eyes flash in the darkness. The young man remained immovable. Milady tried to open the door in order to throw herself out. "Take care, madame," said the young man coolly. "You will kill yourself in jumping." Milady reseated herself, foaming. The officer leaned forward, looked at her in his turn, and appeared surprised to see that face, just before so beautiful, distorted with passion and almost hideous. The artful creature at once comprehended that she was injuring herself by allowing him thus to read her soul. She collected her features, and in a complaining voice said, "In the name of heaven, sir, tell me if it is to you, if it is to your government, if it is to an enemy I am to attribute the violence that is done to me." "No violence will be offered to you, madame, and what happens to you is the result of a very simple measure, which we are obliged to adopt with all who land in England." "Then you don't know me, sir?" "It is the first time I have had the honor of seeing you." "And on your honor, you have no cause of hatred against me?" "None, I swear to you." There was so much serenity, coolness, mildness even in the voice of the young man that Milady felt reassured. At length, after a journey of nearly an hour, the carriage stopped before an iron gate, which closed an avenue leading to a castle severe in form, massive, and isolated. Then, as the wheels rolled over a fine gravel, Milady could hear a vast roaring, which she at once recognized as the voice of the sea dashing against some steep cliffs. The carriage passed under two arched gateways, and at length stopped in a court, large, dark, and square. Almost immediately the door of the carriage was opened. The young man sprang lightly out, and presented his hand to Milady, who leaned upon it, and in her turn alighted with tolerable calmness. "Still, then, I am a prisoner," said Milady, looking around her and bringing back her eyes with a most gracious smile to the young officer. "But I feel assured it will not be for long," added she. "My own conscience and your politeness, sir, are the guarantees of that." However flattering this compliment, the officer made no reply, but drawing from his belt a little silver whistle such as boatswains use in ships of war, he whistled 3 times with 3 different modulations. Immediately several men appeared, who unharnessed the smoking horses and put the carriage into a house. Then the officer, with the same calm politeness, invited his prisoner to enter the house. She, with a still smiling countenance, took his arm and passed with him under a low, arched door, which by a vaulted passage, lighted only at the farther end, led to a stone staircase around an angle of stone. They then came to a massive door, which after the introduction into the lock of a key which the young man carried with him, turned heavily upon its hinges and disclosed the chamber destined for Milady. With a single glance, the prisoner took in the apartment in its minutest details. It was a chamber whose furniture was at once appropriate for a prisoner or a free man, and yet bars at the windows and outside bolts at the door decided the question in favor of the prison. In an instant, all the strength of mind of this creature, though drawn from the most vigorous sources, abandoned her. She sank into a large easy-chair with her arms crossed, her head lowered, and expecting every instant to see a judge enter to interrogate her. But no one entered except 2 or 3 marines, who brought her trunks and packages, deposited them in a corner, and retired without speaking. The officer superintended all these details with the same calmness Milady had constantly seen in him, never pronouncing a word himself, and making himself obeyed by a gesture of his hand or a sound of his whistle. It might have been said that between this man and his inferiors, spoken language did not exist, or had become useless. At length, Milady could hold out no longer. She broke the silence. "In the name of heaven, sir," cried she, "what means all that is passing? Put an end to my doubts. I have courage enough for any danger I can foresee, for every misfortune which I understand. Where am I, and why am I here? If I am free, why these bars and these doors? If I am a prisoner, what crime have I committed?" "You are here in the apartment destined for you, madame. I received orders to go and take charge of you on the sea, and to conduct you to this castle. This order I believe I have accomplished with all the exactness of a soldier, but also with the courtesy of a gentleman. There terminates, at least to the present moment, the duty I had to fulfill toward you. The rest concerns another person." "And who is that other person?" asked Milady warmly. "Can you not tell me his name?" At the moment a great jingling of spurs was heard on the stairs. Some voices passed and faded away, and the sound of a single footstep approached the door. "That person is here, madame," said the officer, leaving the entrance open and drawing himself up in an attitude of respect. At the same time the door opened. A man appeared on the threshold. He was without a hat, carried a sword, and flourished a handkerchief in his hand. Milady thought she recognized this shadow in the gloom. She supported herself with one hand upon the arm of the chair, and advanced her head as if to meet a certainty. The stranger advanced slowly, and as he advanced, after entering into the circle of light projected by the lamp, Milady involuntarily drew back. Then, when she had no longer any doubt, she cried, in a state of stupor, "What, my brother? Is it you?" "Yes, fair lady," replied Lord de Winter, making a bow half courteous, half ironical. "It is I, myself." "But this castle, then?" "Is mine." "This chamber?" "Is yours." "I am, then, your prisoner?" "Nearly so." "But this is a frightful abuse of power." "No high-sounding words. Let us sit down and chat quietly, as brother and sister ought to do." Then turning toward the door and seeing that the young officer was waiting for his last orders, he said, "All is well, I thank you. Now leave us alone, Mr. Felton." End of chapter 49. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 50 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chat between brother and sister. During the time which Lord de Winter took to shut the door, close a shutter, and draw a chair near to his sister-in-law's fauteuil, Milady, anxiously thoughtful, plunged her glance into the depths of possibility and discovered all the plan of which she could not even obtain a glance as long as she was ignorant into whose hands she had fallen. She knew her brother-in-law to be a worthy gentleman, a bold hunter, an intrepid player, enterprising with women, but by no means remarkable for his skill in intrigues. How had he discovered her arrival and caused her to be seized? Why did he detain her? Athos had dropped some words which proved that the conversation she had with the cardinal had fallen into outside ears, but she could not suppose that he had dug a countermine so promptly and so boldly. She rather feared that her preceding operations in England might have been discovered. Buckingham might have guessed that it was she who had cut off the two studs, and avenged himself for that little treachery, but Buckingham was incapable of going to any excess against a woman, particularly if that woman was supposed to have acted from a feeling of jealousy. This supposition appeared to her most reasonable. It seemed to her that they wanted to revenge the past and not to anticipate the future. At all events, she congratulated herself upon having fallen into the hands of her brother-in-law, with whom she reckoned she could deal very easily, rather than into the hands of an acknowledged and intelligent enemy. "Yes, let us chat, brother," said she with a kind of cheerfulness, decided as she was to draw from the conversation, in spite of all the dissimulation Lord de Winter could bring, the revelations of which she stood in need to regulate her future conduct. "You have then decided to come to England again?" said Lord de Winter. "In spite of the resolutions you so often expressed in Paris, never to set your feet on British ground?"
Milady replied to this question by another question.
"To begin with, tell me," said she, "how have you watched me so closely as to be aware beforehand not only of my arrival, but even of the day, the hour, and the port at which I should arrive?"
Lord de Winter adopted the same tactics as Milady, thinking that as his sister-in-law employed them, they must be the best.
"But tell me, my dear sister," replied he, "what makes you come to England?" "I come to see you,"
replied Milady, without knowing how much she aggravated by this reply the suspicions to which D'Artagnan's letter had given birth in the mind of her brother-in-law, and only desiring to gain the goodwill of her auditor by a falsehood.
"Ah, to see me?" said de Winter, cunningly. "To be sure, to see you. What is there astonishing in that?" "And you had no other object in coming to England but to see me?" "No." "So it was for me alone you have taken the trouble to cross the Channel?" "For you alone."
"The deuce! What tenderness, my sister!"
"But am I not your nearest relative?" demanded Milady with a tone of the most touching ingenuousness.
"And my only heir, are you not?" said Lord de Winter in his turn, fixing his eyes on those of Milady. Whatever command she had over herself, Milady could not help starting, and as in pronouncing the last words Lord de Winter placed his hand upon the arm of his sister, this start did not escape him. In fact, the blow was direct and severe. The first idea that occurred to Milady's mind was that she had been betrayed by Kitty, and that she had recounted to the Baron the selfish aversion toward himself of which she had imprudently allowed some marks to escape before her servant. She also recollected the furious and imprudent attack she had made upon D'Artagnan when he spared the life of her brother.
"I do not understand, my lord," said she, in order to gain time and make her adversary speak out. "What do you mean to say? Is there any secret meaning concealed beneath your words?"
"Oh, my God, no!" said Lord de Winter with apparent good nature.
"You wish to see me, and you come to England. I learn this desire, or rather I suspect that you feel it, and in order to spare you all the annoyances of a nocturnal arrival in a port and all the fatigues of landing, I send one of my officers to meet you. I place a carriage at his orders, and he brings you hither to this castle, of which I am governor, whither I come every day, and where, in order to satisfy our mutual desire of seeing each other, I have prepared you a chamber. What is there more astonishing in all that I have said to you than in what you have told me?" "No, what I think astonishing is that you should expect my coming."
"And yet that is the most simple thing in the world, my dear sister. Have you not observed that the captain of your little vessel, on entering the roadstead, sent forward, in order to obtain permission to enter the port, a little boat bearing his log-book and the register of his voyages? I am commandant of the port. They brought me that book. I recognized your name in it. My heart told me that what your mouth has just confirmed, that is to say, with what view you have exposed yourself to the dangers of a sea so perilous, or at least so troublesome at this moment, and I sent my cutter to meet you. You know the rest." Milady knew that Lord de Winter lied, and she was the more alarmed.
"My brother," continued she, "was not that my Lord Buckingham whom I saw on the jetty this evening as we arrived?"
"Himself! Ah, I can understand how the sight of him struck you," replied Lord de Winter. "You came from a country where he must be very much talked of, and I know that his armaments against France greatly engaged the attention of your friend, the Cardinal."
"My friend, the Cardinal?"
cried Milady, seeing that on this point, as on the other, Lord de Winter seemed well instructed.
"Is he not your friend?" replied the Baron negligently. "Ah, pardon. I thought so, but we will return to my Lord Duke presently. Let us not depart from the sentimental turn our conversation has taken. You came, you say, to see me? Yes. Well, I reply that you shall be served to the height of your wishes, and that we shall see each other every day. Am I, then, to remain here eternally? Demanded Milady with a certain terror. Do you find yourself badly lodged, sister? Demand anything you want, and I will hasten to have you furnished with it. But I have neither my women nor my servants. You shall have all, madame. Tell me on what footing your household was established by your first husband, and although I am only your brother-in-law, I will arrange one similar. My first husband? Cried Milady, looking at Lord de Winter with eyes almost starting from their sockets. Yes, your French husband. I don't speak of my brother. If you have forgotten, as he is still living, I can write to him and he will send me information on the subject. A cold sweat burst from the brow of Milady. You jest, said she in a hollow voice. Do I look so? Said the Baron, rising and going a step backward. Or rather, you insult me, continued she, pressing with her stiffened hands the two arms of her easy-chair and raising herself upon her wrists. I insult you, said Lord de Winter with contempt. In truth, madame, do you think that can be possible? Indeed, sir, said Milady, you must be either drunk or mad. Leave the room and send me a woman. Women are very indiscreet, my sister. Cannot I serve you as a waiting maid? By that means all our secrets will remain in the family. Insolent! Cried Milady, and as if acted upon by a spring, she bounded toward the Baron, who awaited her attack with his crossed arms, but nevertheless with one hand on the hilt of his sword. Come, said he, I know you are accustomed to assassinate people, but I warn you, I shall defend myself, even against you. You are right, said Milady. You have all the appearance of being cowardly enough to lift your hand against a woman. Perhaps so, and I have an excuse, for mine would not be the first hand of a man that has been placed upon you, I imagine. And the Baron pointed with a slow and accusing gesture to the left shoulder of Milady, which he almost touched with his finger. Milady uttered a deep, inward shriek and retreated to a corner of the room like a panther which crouches for a spring. "Oh, growl as much as you please," cried Lord de Winter, "but don't try to bite, for I warn you that it would be to your disadvantage. There are here no procurators who regulate successions beforehand. There is no knight-errant to come and seek a quarrel with me on account of the fair lady I detain a prisoner, but I have judges quite ready, who will quickly dispose of a woman so shameless as to glide, a bigamist, into the bed of Lord de Winter, my brother, and these judges, I warn you, will soon send you to an executioner who will make both your shoulders alike." The eyes of Milady darted such flashes that although he was a man and armed before an unarmed woman, he felt the chill of fear glide through his whole frame. However, he continued all the same, but with increasing warmth. "Yes, I can very well understand that after having inherited the fortune of my brother, it would be very agreeable to you to be my heir likewise. But know beforehand, if you kill me or cause me to be killed, my precautions are taken. Not a penny of what I possess will pass into your hands. Were you not already rich enough, you who possess nearly $1 million? And could you not stop your fatal career if you did not do evil for the infinite and supreme joy of doing it? Oh, be assured, if the memory of my brother were not sacred to me, you should rot in a state dungeon or satisfy the curiosity of sailors at Tyburn. I will be silent, but You must endure your captivity quietly. In 15 or 20 days I shall set out for La Rochelle with the army. But on the eve of my departure, a vessel which I shall see depart will take you hence and convey you to our colonies in the south. And be assured that you shall be accompanied by one who will blow your brains out at the first attempt you make to return to England or the continent."
Milady listened with an attention that dilated her inflamed eyes.
"Yes, at present," continued Lord de Winter, "you will remain in this castle. The walls are thick, the doors strong, and the bars solid. Besides, your window opens immediately over the sea. The men of my crew, who are devoted to me for life and death, mount guard around this apartment and watch all the passages that lead to the courtyard. Even if you gained the yard, there would still be 3 iron gates for you to pass. The order is positive. A step, a gesture, a word on your part denoting an effort to escape, and you are to be fired upon. If they kill you, English justice will be under an obligation to me for having saved it trouble. Ah, I see your features regain their calmness. Your countenance recovers its assurance. You are saying to yourself, 15 days, 20 days, bah! I have an inventive mind. Before that is expired, some idea will occur to me. I have an infernal spirit. I shall meet with a victim. Before 15 days are gone by, I shall be away from here. Ah, try it."
Milady, finding her thoughts betrayed, dug her nails into her flesh to subdue every emotion that might give to her face any expression except agony. Lord de Winter continued.
"The officer who commands here in my absence, you have already seen and therefore know him. He knows how, as you must have observed, to obey an order, for you did it not, I am sure, come from the Portsmouth hither without endeavoring to make him speak. What do you say of him? Could a statue of marble have been more impassive and more mute? You have already tried the power of your seductions upon many men, and unfortunately you have always succeeded. But I give you leave to try them upon this one. Pardieu! If you succeed with him, I pronounce you the demon himself."
He went toward the door and opened it hastily.
"Call Mr. Felton," said he. "Wait a minute longer, and I will introduce him to you."
There followed between these two personages a strange silence, during which the sound of a slow and regular step was heard approaching. Shortly, a human form appeared in the shade of the corridor, and the young lieutenant, with whom we are already acquainted, stopped at the threshold to receive the orders of the Baron.
"Come in, my dear John," said Lord de Winter. "Come in and shut the door."
The young officer entered.
"Now," said the Baron, "look at this woman. She is young, she is beautiful, she possesses all earthly seductions. Well, she is a monster, who at 25 years of age has been guilty of as many crimes as you could read in a year in the archives of our tribunals. Her voice prejudices her hearers in her favor. Her beauty serves as a bait to her victims. Her body even pays what she promises. I must do her that justice. She will try to seduce you. Perhaps she will try to kill you. I have extricated you from misery, Felton. I have caused you to be named lieutenant. I once saved your life. You know on what occasion. I am for you not only a protector, but a friend, not only a benefactor, but a father. This woman has come back again into England for the purpose of conspiring against my life. I hold this serpent in my hands. Well, I call you, and I say to you, friend Felton, John, my child, guard me, and more particularly guard yourself against this woman. Swear by your hopes of salvation to keep her safely for the chastisement she has merited. John Felton, I trust your word. John Felton, I put faith in your loyalty."
"My lord," said the young officer, summoning to his mild countenance all the hatred he could find in his heart,
"My lord, I swear all shall be done as you desire." Milady received this look like a resigned victim. It was impossible to imagine a more submissive or a more mild expression than that which prevailed on her beautiful countenance. Lord de Winter himself could scarcely recognize the tigress who, a minute before, prepared apparently for a fight. "She is not to leave this chamber, understand, John," continued the Baron. "She is to correspond with nobody. She is to speak to no one but you, if you will do her the honor to address a word to her." "That is sufficient, my lord. I have sworn." "And now, madame, try to make your peace with God, for you are judged by men." Milady let her head sink, as if crushed by this sentence. Lord de Winter went out, making a sign to Felton, who followed him, shutting the door after him. One instant after, the heavy step of a marine who served as sentinel was heard in the corridor, his axe in his girdle and his musket on his shoulder. Milady remained for some minutes in the same position, for she thought they might perhaps be examining her through the keyhole. She then slowly raised her head, which had resumed its formidable expression of menace and defiance, ran to the door to listen, looked out of her window, and returning to bury herself again in her large armchair, she reflected. End of chapter 50, recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 51 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Officer. Meanwhile, the Cardinal looked anxiously for news from England, but no news arrived that was not annoying and threatening. Although La Rochelle was invested, however certain success might appear, thanks to the precautions taken and above all to the dike, which prevented the entrance of any vessel into the besieged city, the blockade might last a long time yet. This was a great affront to the king's army, and a great inconvenience to the cardinal, who had no longer, it is true, to embroil Louis XIII with Anne of Austria, for that affair was over, but he had to adjust matters for Monsieur de Bassompierre, who was embroiled with the Duc d'Angoulême. As to Monsieur, who had begun the siege, he left to the cardinal the task of finishing it. The city, notwithstanding the incredible perseverance of its mayor, had attempted a sort of mutiny for a surrender. The mayor had hanged the mutineers. This execution quieted the ill-disposed, who resolved to allow themselves to die of hunger, this death always appearing to them more slow and less sure than strangulation. On their side, from time to time, the besiegers took the messengers which the Rochellais sent to Buckingham, or the spies which Buckingham sent to the Rochellais. In one case or the other, the trial was soon over. The cardinal pronounced the single word, "hanged." The king was invited to come and see the hanging. He came languidly, placing himself in a good situation to see all the details. This amused him sometimes a little, and made him endure the siege with patience. But it did not prevent his getting very tired, or from talking at every moment of returning to Paris, so that if the messengers and the spies had failed, His Eminence, notwithstanding all his inventiveness, would have found himself much embarrassed. Nevertheless, time passed on, and the Rochellais did not surrender. The last spy that was taken was the bearer of a letter. This letter told Buckingham that the city was at an extremity, but instead of adding, "If your succor does not arrive within 15 days, we will surrender," it added quite simply, "If your succor does not come within 15 days, we shall all be dead with hunger when it comes." The Rochellais then had no hope but in Buckingham. Buckingham was their messiah. It was evident that if they one day learned positively that they must not count on Buckingham, their courage would fail with their hope. The cardinal looked then with great impatience for the news from England which would announce to him that Buckingham would not come. The question of carrying the city by assault, though often debated in the council of the king, had been always rejected. In the first place, La Rochelle appeared impregnable. Then the cardinal, whatever he said, very well knew that the horror of bloodshed in this encounter, in which Frenchmen would combat against Frenchmen, was a retrograde movement of 60 years impressed upon his policy, and the cardinal was at that period what we now call a man of progress. In fact, the sack of La Rochelle and the assassination of 3,000 or 4,000 Huguenots who allowed themselves to be killed would resemble too closely in 1628 the massacre of St. Bartholomew in 1572, and then, above all this extreme measure, which was not at all repugnant to the king, good Catholic as he was, always fell before this argument of the besieging generals: La Rochelle is impregnable except to famine. The cardinal could not drive from his mind the fear he entertained of his terrible emissary, for he comprehended the strange qualities of this woman, sometimes a serpent, sometimes a lion. Had she betrayed him? Was she dead? He knew her well enough in all cases to know that whether acting for or against him, as a friend or an enemy, she would not remain motionless without great impediments. But whence did these impediments arise? That was what he could not know. And yet he reckoned, and with reason, on Milady. He had divined in the past of this woman terrible things which his red mantle alone could cover, and he felt, from one cause or another, that this woman was his own, as she could look to no other but himself for a support superior to the danger which threatened her. He resolved then to carry on the war alone, and to look for no success foreign to himself, but as we look for a fortunate chance. He continued to press the raising of the famous dike which was to starve La Rochelle. Meanwhile he cast his eyes over the unfortunate city which contained so much deep misery and so many heroic virtues, and recalling the saying of Louis XI, his political predecessor, as he himself was the predecessor of Robespierre, he repeated this maxim of Tristan's gossip: divide in order to reign. Henry IV, when besieging Paris, had loaves and provisions thrown over the walls. The cardinal had little notes thrown over in which he represented to the Rochellais how unjust, selfish, and barbarous was the conduct of their leaders. These leaders had corn in abundance, and would not let them partake of it. They adopted as a maxim, for they too had maxims, that it was of very little consequence that women, children, and old men should die, so long as the men who were to defend the walls remained strong and healthy. Up to that time, whether from devotedness or from want of power to act against it, this maxim, without being generally adopted, nevertheless passed from theory into practice. But the notes did it injury. The notes reminded the men that the children, women, and old men whom they allowed to die were their sons, their wives, and their fathers, and that it would be more just for everyone to be reduced to the common misery, in order that equal conditions should give birth to unanimous resolutions. These notes had all the effect that he who wrote them could expect, in that they induced a great number of the inhabitants to open private negotiations with the royal army. But at the moment when the cardinal saw his means already bearing fruit, and applauded himself for having put it in action, an inhabitant of La Rochelle who had contrived to pass the royal lines, God knows how, such was the watchfulness of Bassompierre, Schomberg, and the Duc d'Angoulême, themselves watched over by the cardinal, an inhabitant of La Rochelle, we say, entered the city, coming from Portsmouth, and saying that he had seen a magnificent fleet ready to sail within 8 days. Still further, Buckingham announced to the mayor that at length the Great League was about to declare itself against France, and that the kingdom would be at once invaded by the English, Imperial, and Spanish armies. This letter was read publicly in all parts of the city. Copies were put up at the corners of the streets, and even they who had begun to open negotiations interrupted them, being resolved to await the succor so pompously announced. This unexpected circumstance brought back Richelieu's former anxiety, and forced him, in spite of himself, once more to turn his eyes to the other side of the sea. During this time, exempt from the anxiety of its only and true chief, the royal army led a joyous life, neither provisions nor money being wanting in the camp. All the corps rivaled one another in audacity and gaiety, to take spies and hang them, to make hazardous expeditions upon the dike or the sea, to imagine wild plans and to execute them coolly, Such were the pastimes which made the army find these days short, which were not only so long to the Rochellais, a prey to famine and anxiety, but even to the Cardinal, who blockaded them so closely. Sometimes, when the Cardinal, always on horseback, like the lowest gendarme of the army, cast a pensive glance over those works, so slowly keeping pace with his wishes, which the engineers, brought from all the corners of France, were executing under his orders, if he met a musketeer of the company of Tréville, he drew near and looked at him in a peculiar manner, and not recognizing in him one of our four companions, he turned his penetrating look and profound thoughts in another direction. One day, when oppressed with a mortal weariness of mind, without hope in the negotiations with the city, without news from England, the Cardinal went out, without any other aim than to be out of doors, and accompanied only by Cahusac and La Houdinière, strolled along the beach. Mingling the immensity of his dreams with the immensity of the ocean, he came, his horse going at a foot's pace, to a hill from the top of which he perceived behind a hedge, reclining on the sand and catching in its passage one of those rays of the sun so rare at this period of the year, 7 men surrounded by empty bottles. 4 of these men were our Musketeers, preparing to listen to a letter one of them had just received. This letter was so important that it made them forsake their cards and their dice on the drumhead. The other 3 were occupied in opening an enormous flagon of Collicure wine. These were the lackeys of these gentlemen. The Cardinal was, as we have said, in very low spirits, and nothing when he was in that state of mind increased his depression so much as gaiety in others. Besides, he had another strange fancy, which was always to believe that the causes of his sadness created the gaiety of others. Making a sign to La Houdinière and Cahusac to stop, he alighted from his horse and went toward these suspected merry companions, hoping by means of the sand which deadened the sound of his steps and of the hedge which concealed his approach, to catch some words of this conversation which appeared so interesting. At 10 paces from the hedge he recognized the talkative Gascon, and as he had already perceived that these men were Musketeers, he did not doubt that the 3 others were those called the Inseparables, that is to say, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. It may be supposed that his desire to hear the conversation was augmented by this discovery. His eyes took a strange expression, and with a step of a tiger cat, he advanced toward the hedge. But he had not been able to catch more than a few vague syllables without any positive sense, when a sonorous and short cry made him start, and attracted the attention of the Musketeers. "Officer!" cried Grimaud. "You are speaking, you scoundrel!" said Athos, rising upon his elbow and transfixing Grimaud with his flaming look. Grimaud therefore added nothing to his speech, but contented himself with pointing his index finger in the direction of the hedge, announcing by this gesture the Cardinal and his escort. With a single bound, the Musketeers were on their feet and saluted with respect. The Cardinal seemed furious. "It appears that Messieurs the Musketeers keep guard," said he. "Are the English expected by land, or do the Musketeers consider themselves superior officers?" "Monseigneur," replied Athos, for amid the general fright he alone had preserved the noble calmness and coolness that never forsook him. "Monseigneur, the Musketeers, when they are not on duty, or when their duty is over, drink and play at dice, and they are certainly superior officers to their lackeys." "Lackeys?" grumbled the Cardinal. "Lackeys, who have the order to warn their masters when anyone passes, are not lackeys, they are sentinels." "Your Eminence may perceive that if we had not taken this precaution, we should have been exposed to allowing you to pass without presenting you our respects or offering you our thanks for the favor you have done us in uniting us. D'Artagnan," continued Athos, "you who but lately were so anxious for such an opportunity for expressing your gratitude to Monseigneur, here it is. Avail yourself of it." These words were pronounced with that imperturbable phlegm which distinguished Athos in the hour of danger. and with that excessive politeness which made of him at certain moments a king more majestic than kings by birth. D'Artagnan came forward and stammered out a few words of gratitude, which soon expired under the gloomy looks of the cardinal. "It does not signify, gentlemen," continued the cardinal, without appearing to be in the least swerved from his first intention by the diversion which Athos had started. "It does not signify, gentlemen. I do not like to have simple soldiers, because they have the advantage of serving in the privileged corps, thus to play the great lords. Discipline is the same for them as for everybody else." Athos allowed the cardinal to finish his sentence completely, and bowed in sign of assent. Then he resumed in his turn. "Discipline, Monseigneur, has, I hope, in no way been forgotten by us. We are not on duty, and we believe that not being on duty, we were at liberty to dispose of our time as we pleased. If we are so fortunate as to have some particular duty to perform for your Eminence, we are ready to obey you. Your Eminence may perceive," continued Athos, knitting his brow, for this sort of investigation began to annoy him, "that we have not come out without our arms." And he showed the cardinal with his finger the 4 muskets piled near the drum, on which were the cards and dice. "Your Eminence may believe," added D'Artagnan, "that we would have come to meet you if we could have supposed it was Monseigneur coming toward us with so few attendants." The cardinal bit his mustache, and even his lips a little. "Do you know what you look like altogether, as you are armed and guarded by your lackeys?" said the cardinal. "You look like 4 conspirators." "Oh, as to that, Monseigneur, it is true," said Athos. "We do conspire, as your Eminence might have seen the other morning, only we conspire against the Rochellais." "Ah, you gentlemen of policy," replied the cardinal, knitting his brow in his turn. "The secret of many unknown things may perhaps be found in your brains. If we could read them as you read that letter which you concealed as soon as you saw me coming." The color mounted to the face of Athos, and he made a step toward his Eminence. "One might think you really suspected us, Monseigneur, and we were undergoing a real interrogatory. If it be so, we trust your Eminence will deign to explain yourself, and we should then at least be acquainted with our real position." "And if it were an interrogatory?" replied the cardinal. "Others besides you have undergone such, Monsieur Athos, and have replied thereto." "Thus I have told your Eminence that you had but to question us, and we are ready to reply." "What was that letter you were about to read, Monsieur Aramis, and which you so promptly concealed?" "A woman's letter, Monseigneur." "Ah, yes, I see," said the cardinal. "We must be discreet with this sort of letters, but nevertheless, we may show them to a confessor, and you know I have taken orders." "Monseigneur," said Athos with a calmness the more terrible because he risked his head in making this reply, "the letter is a woman's letter, but it is neither signed Marianne de Lorme nor Madame d'Aiguillon." The cardinal became as pale as death. Lightning darted from his eyes. He turned round as if to give an order to Cahusac and Houdinière. Athos saw the movement. He made a step toward the muskets, upon which the other 3 friends had fixed their eyes, like men ill-disposed to allow themselves to be taken. The cardinalists were 3, the Musketeers, lackeys included, were 7. He judged that the match would be so much the less equal if Athos and his companions were really plotting, and by one of those rapid turns which he always had at command, all his anger faded away into a smile. "Well, well," said he, "you are brave young men, proud in daylight, faithful in darkness. We can find no fault with you for watching over yourselves when you watch so carefully over others. Gentlemen, I have not forgotten the night in which you served me as an escort to the Red Dovecot. If there were any danger to be apprehended on the road I am going, I would request you to accompany me. But as there is none, remain where you are. Finish your bottles, your game, and your letter. Adieu, gentlemen." And remounting his horse, which Cahusac led to him, he saluted them with his hand and rode away. The four young men, standing and motionless, followed him with their eyes without speaking a single word until he had disappeared. They then looked at one another. The countenances of all gave evidence of terror, for notwithstanding the friendly adieu of his Eminence, they plainly perceived that the cardinal went away with rage in his heart. Athos alone smiled with a self-possessed, disdainful smile. When the cardinal was out of hearing and sight,
"That Grimaud kept bad watch,"
cried Porthos, who had a great inclination to vent his ill humor on somebody. Grimaud was about to reply, to excuse himself. Athos lifted his finger, and Grimaud was silent. "Would you have given up the letter, Aramis?" said D'Artagnan.
"I,"
said Aramis in his most flute-like tone,
"I had made up my mind. If he had insisted upon the letter being given up to him, I would have presented the letter to him with one hand, and with the other I would have run my sword through his body."
"I expected as much," said Athos, "and that was why I threw myself between you and him. Indeed, this man is very much to blame for talking thus to other men. One would say he had never had to do with any but women and children."
"My dear Athos, I admire you, but nevertheless we were in the wrong after all."
"How in the wrong?" said Athos. "Whose, then, is the air we breathe? Whose is the ocean upon which we look? Whose is the sand upon which we were reclining? Whose is the letter of your mistress? Do these belong to the cardinal? Upon my honor, this man fancies the world belongs to him. There you stood, stammering, stupefied, annihilated. One might have supposed the Bastille appeared before you, and that the gigantic Medusa had converted you into stone. Is being in love conspiring? You are in love with a woman with whom the cardinal has caused to be shut up, and you wish to get her out of the hands of the cardinal. That's a match you are playing with his Eminence. This letter is your game. Why should you expose your game to your adversary? That is never done. Let him find it out if he can. We can find out his." "Well, that's all very sensible, Athos," said D'Artagnan. "In that case, let there be no more question of what's past, and let Aramis resume the letter from his cousin, where the cardinal interrupted him." Aramis drew the letter from his pocket. The three friends surrounded him, and the three lackeys grouped themselves again near the wine jar. "You had only read a line or two," said D'Artagnan. "Read the letter again from the commencement."
"Willingly,"
said Aramis.
"My dear cousin, I think I shall make up my mind to set out for Bethune, where my sister has placed our little servant in the convent of the Carmelites. This poor child is quite resigned, as she knows she cannot live elsewhere without the salvation of her soul being in danger. Nevertheless, if the affairs of our family are arranged, as we hope they will be, I believe she will run the risk of being damned, and will return to those she regrets, particularly as she knows they are always thinking of her. Meanwhile, she is not very wretched. What she most desires is a letter from her intended. I know that such viands pass with difficulty through convent gratings, but after all, as I have given you proofs, my dear cousin, I am not unskilled in such affairs, and I will take charge of the commission. My sister thanks you for your good and eternal remembrance. She has experienced much anxiety, but she is now at length a little reassured, having sent her secretary away in order that nothing may happen unexpectedly. Adieu, my dear cousin. Tell us news of yourself as often as you can. That is to say, as often as you can with safety. I embrace you. Marie Michon.
"Oh, what do I not owe you, Aramis?" said D'Artagnan. "Dear Constance, I have at length, then, intelligence of you. She lives. She is in safety in a convent. She is at Bethune. Where is Bethune, Athos?" "Why, upon the frontiers of Artois and of Flanders. The siege once over, we shall be able to make a tour in that direction."
"And that will not be long, it is to be hoped," said Porthos. "For they have this morning hanged a spy who confessed that the Rochellais were reduced to the leather of their shoes. Supposing that after having eaten the leather they eat the soles, I cannot see much that is left unless they eat one another."
"Poor fools," said Athos, emptying a glass of excellent Bordeaux wine, which, without having at that period the reputation it now enjoys, merited it no less. "Poor fools, as if the Catholic religion was not the most advantageous and the most agreeable of all religions. All the same," resumed he, after having clicked his tongue against his palate, "they are brave fellows. But what the devil are you about, Aramis?" continued Athos. "Why are you squeezing that letter into your pocket?" "Yes," said D'Artagnan, "Athos is right. It must be burned, and yet if we burn it, who knows whether Monsieur Cardinal has not a secret to interrogate ashes?" "He must have one," said Athos.
"What will you do with the letter, then?"
asked Porthos. "Come here, Grimaud," said Athos. Grimaud rose and obeyed. "As a punishment for having spoken without permission, my friend, you will please to eat this piece of paper. Then, to recompense you for the service you will have rendered us, you shall afterward drink this glass of wine. First, here is the letter. Eat heartily." Grimaud smiled, and with his eyes fixed upon the glass which Athos held in his hand, he ground the paper well between his teeth, and then swallowed it. "Bravo, Monsieur Grimaud," said Athos. "And now take this. That's well. We dispense with your saying grace." Grimaud silently swallowed the glass of Bordeaux wine, but his eyes, raised toward heaven during this delicious occupation, spoke a language which, though mute, was not the less expressive. "And now," said Athos, "unless Monsieur Cardinal should form the ingenious idea of ripping up Grimaud, I think we may be pretty much at our ease respecting the letter." Meantime his Eminence continued his melancholy ride, murmuring between his mustaches, "These 4 men must positively be mine." End of chapter 51. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia.
And so the seeds of doubt have been planted. Milady, the master manipulator, has begun her psychological assault on the seemingly incorruptible John Felton. She has painted herself as a virtuous Puritan, a martyr suffering at the hands of the devil Buckingham. The young officer is intrigued, his rigid worldview beginning to crack. Will he fall into her web of lies? The slow, terrifying seduction of a righteous soul has begun. Join us in our next video to witness the continuation of Milady's brilliant and deadly escape plan. And don't miss the upcoming art director's debrief on these chapters.